tulizama kwa maji tukanawiri kuliko wao, hatukupambwa kama wao, tukapendeza zaidi yao. Walitubadilisha majina, hawakubadili.
How can someone who claims to love you turn around and end your life? Nelvin Museti, a young woman full of promise, never imagined her trust could become a weapon against her. On a quiet night in Langata, Nairobi, she fell from the third floor of her apartment. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, maybe a desperate leap, but the truth is darker. Evidence, witnesses, and forensic analysis point to something far more sinister. This is the story of a life stolen, of a death that should never have happened, and of a man who may have turned love into murder. Dark Echoes 254. 28-year-old Nelvin Museti's life ended in the early hours of January 14, 2024, in a tragedy that rattled the Langata community to its core. She reportedly fell from the third floor of Ascort Apartments, a moment witnessed by the caretaker, Mr. Mwangi, who frantically alerted police after seeing her body hit the ground. Officers rushed to the scene and found Nelvin lying at the back of the building, her body eerily free of visible injuries except for the blood slowly oozing from her nose, a detail that raised more questions than answers. Neighbors told detectives they had been jolted awake by a violent thud, prompting them to rush outside, only to be met by a sight that would haunt them for years. The police processed the scene with precision, photographing every angle, mapping every trajectory, and transferring Nelvin's body to the city mortuary for a post-mortem that would decide whether this was a suicide, an accident, or something darker. And as the investigators quietly began considering the possibility of foul play, the world she left behind started to moan in loud, aching waves. Nelvin's social media, carefully curated, soft, intentional, revealed a young woman who had held her faith like an armor. Her bio reading, "I ain't much, but I'm all I got. It has been God. It will forever be God." Friends and family flooded timelines with grief-soaked tributes, refusing to let her story dissolve into another cold statistic. On Facebook, people wrote through heartbreak, remembering their unshakable friendship and confessing a pain that words could barely hold. Others mourned the silence of her departure and questions she left behind, and the heavy thought that she might have felt alone in her last moments. As detectives sifted through clues and testimonies, one truth echoed louder than the initial police report. Nelvin's death wasn't just a fall. It was a fracture in the lives of everyone who loved her, a wound that demanded answer, and a reminder of how quickly a life can slip from the world without leaving the reasons behind. The investigation into Nelvin Museti's death began with more questions than answers. And from the very first hour, detectives sensed that the story unfolding at Ascort's apartment wasn't nearly as straightforward as it looked. What initially came in as a routine fall from height quickly shifted tone as DCI's officers walked the scene. There was no broken rails, no signs of a slip, no frantic fingerprints smeared on the concrete, nothing that convincingly pointed to a desperate jump. Instead, the stillness around the spot where her body lay felt unnervingly deliberate, almost staged. Officers documented everything meticulously, but it was the absence of injuries beyond the blood trickling from her nose that made them slow down and reconsider the narrative. A fall from the third floor almost always leaves clear trauma on the limbs or torso. With Nelvin, the pattern didn't match. Inside the building, detectives interviewed neighbors who described the night as usually quiet, except for the single heavy thud that woke several of them. No screams, no arguments, no commotion, just one sound, impact, and then silence. Their account sharpened police suspicion. If something happened inside that apartment, it happened quietly, cleanly, and possibly with someone who knew how to keep a scene controlled. The caretaker, still shaken, added that Nelvin hadn't seemed distressed earlier in the day, and nothing about her demeanor suggested a person on the edge of taking her own life. DCI officers then shifted their attention to Melvin's apartment. Even before entering, they could feel it. Something was off. The room didn't show the chaos of someone preparing to jump. Instead, it held an eerie stillness, as if someone had removed the noise and left only the shell behind. Detectives combed through every inch, looking for signs of struggle, forced entry, or a trail of movement that might have led to the balcony. What they found and what they didn't shaped the direction of the investigation. There were no toppled chairs or overturned tables, no broken items, no defensive marks on the wall. Yet, the apartment didn't feel untouched either. It felt curated, almost too neat for a night that ended in death. Her phone became an immediate point of interest. Investigators pulled her call logs, messages, and last online activities, hunting for the final person she interacted with. They also began tracking who had been in or near the building that night. Visitors, partners, friends. Detectives widened the net, interviewing anyone who had contact with her in the days leading up to her death. Was she threatened? Was she being followed? Was there a relationship that had turned sour? The deeper they dug, the more the simple narrative of fall dissolved. A postmortem would become the turning point. If the body didn't match the story, the investigation would officially shift gears. And as detectives waited for the forensic verdict, they treated the case with the seriousness of a suspected homicide. Every photo from the crime scene, every neighbor's memory, every piece of data from Nelvin's device was examined with a single question in mind. Did Nelvin fall, or was she already gone before the hit on the ground? When Nelvin Museti body reached City Mortuary, the truth finally had a chance to speak for itself, and it spoke in bruises, patterns, and silent contradiction. The pathologist approached the examination with the same question weighing on every detective's mind. Does this body tell the story of a fall or a crime? The results were immediate, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. Despite having allegedly plunged from a third-floor balcony, Nelvin's injury did not align with the violent chaos expected from such a drop. Her limbs were shattered, her torso wasn't crushed. There were no defensive wounds scraping across her hands or arms. Instead, her body bore a quiet, concentrated trauma, blunt force impact to the head, a single region, not the widespread devastation of a fall. Blood had pooled behind her skull in a pattern that suggested she had taken a blow before she ever reached the edge of that balcony. The oozing from her nose, once dismissed as a simple sign of internal bleeding from the fall, suddenly looked like the aftermath of a direct strike. Her internal organs were intact in ways that contradicted the height she supposedly fell from. And the absence of fracture made one conclusion disturbingly clear. If Nelvin did go over that balcony, she was either unconscious, incapacitated, or already dead. The pathologist's reports whispered homicide, but with the kind of precision that collapsed entire lies. To detectives, the postmortem wasn't just a medical document, it was a pivot point. It turned the case from a tragic fall to a probable killing. It forced investigators to revisit the apartment, retrace the night, and re-examine every person who had access to her. Someone knew exactly what happened before Nelvin's body hit the ground, and the medical evidence had just torn the story open. Neighbors, still shaken, recalled seeing a man leave the apartment shortly before the thud was heard. When police cross-referenced description with the woman's identity, the match was immediate. Additionally, forensic teams combed through the apartment and discovered items that aligned with the woman's presence: used condoms, bottle of alcohol, and traces of bang, all consistent with eyewitness account of his visit. The absence of signs of forced entry or struggle with someone else reinforced that Nelvin knew and trusted the man, giving him unrestricted access. Investigators then retraced their steps digitally. They recovered security footage from nearby buildings and street cameras, confirming a vehicle connected to Ouma entering and leaving the vicinity in the early morning hours. Calls and messages to Nelvin in the hours leading up to her death were also traced back to him. Every data point, human testimony, physical evidence, digital breadcrumbs converged on the same conclusion. Victor Ouma had been with Nelvin in her final hours, making him central to the investigation. This connection was not only technical but also circumstantial. Police noted that the timing of his departure, the positioning of her body, and the post-mortem findings that suggested she may have been incapacitated before the fall. Collectively, these factors led to his arrest and remand for 21 days while detectives worked to reconstruct the events that led to her death. In essence, it was a combination of traditional police work, forensic analysis, and modern digital tracking that linked him to the night Nelvin Museti died, a tragic intersection of trust, opportunity, and violence. The primary suspect in Nelvin Museti's death is Victor Ouma, the GSU officer last seen with her inside Ascort Apartments the night she died. Investigators focused on him immediately because all available evidence placed him at the scene during the critical hours leading to her death. Phone records and digital activity showed he remained in the vicinity throughout the evening and early mornings. Witnesses, including neighbors and the caretaker, described a man leaving the apartment shortly before the third was heard. Forensic teams recovered items consistent with his presence, including alcohol bottles, used condoms, and traces of bang. There were no signs of forced entry suggesting that Nelvin allowed him access willingly. Investigators explored possible motive. Jealousy was considered a strong factor as friends reported previous tensions in the relationship. Alcohol and substance may have escalated conflicts that night. Detectives also examined whether argument or disagreement between the two had turned violent. The post-mortem indicated Nelvin may have been incapacitated before her fall, raising the likelihood that her death was not accidental. Each piece of evidence pointed towards someone close to her having the opportunity and control to cause harm. Other individuals were investigated but showed no credible connection to the apartment or the timeline of her final hours. Detectives concentrated on reconstructing the sequence of events between Ouma's departure and the moment neighbors discovered her body. By mapping phone activities, witness accounts, and forensic finding, investigators sought to understand both opportunity and intent. The case is still ongoing. The case highlighted the danger that can arise when someone trusted is in a position of power over a vulnerable individual. Nelvin's death was not random. It involved proximity, control, and access. Every clue reinforced the notion that the person responsible was someone who had both motive and the ability to act without immediate detection. The investigation remained ongoing, focused on confirming whether her death was deliberate or determine the exact circumstances that led to her fall from the third floor.